Let's get started. So welcome again to the fourth of our series of webinar sessions on utilization of voluntary consensus standards and conformity assessment. Today, we're gonna have an overview and perspectives of national regulatory authorities, conformity assessment sector, and the industry for medical technologies. We will get started as we generally do with some housekeeping messages. As you may recall, this session is being recorded and it is going to be uploaded to the coalition's website, so you can go back and check and also share it with whomever you consider that might be benefited out of the materials that we produce during this series. We again have simultaneous interpretation to English, Portuguese, and Spanish. You can access that through the button located at the bottom of your screens. And then you can choose your preferred language. Microphones of all the participants are closed to prevent background noise, so we do appreciate to make it an interactive and productive session to capture all your questions in the Q&A feature of the Zoom platform that it's also located as an icon at the bottom of your screens. We also appreciate when you share your questions to the chat box, but we still prefer if you can do that through the Q&A so we can make sure that we do not lose any of your questions. And for the speakers, just a kind reminder, if you can have your cameras open while doing your presentations and during the Q&A sessions, we will appreciate that a lot so we may facilitate the work of our interpreters. So today we have our session divided in two parts. The first part is where we will have, we will start with a welcome message from Besa Bunichi from the FDA, and then we will start with a panel on conformity assessment as essential resource for medical device regulatory authorities, industry, and of course for regulatory convergence. For this one, Stephen Vibes is going to help us moderating, and he will be introducing our kind panelists today. We'll have a 5 minutes break after that, and then we will start a panel discussion with the regulators on the utilization of international standards and conformity assessment by medical device national regulatory authorities. And for that part, we will have Stacy Sullivan from the US FDA helping us moderate, and we will have also representatives from Colombia and Mexico to share on their experiences on the use of international standards. We're going to be closing this with some remarks from Daniel Vasquez from the USAID and from the coalition. So with this, Besa, I could appreciate if you can help us with the opening remarks.
Thank you very much, Sandra, for getting us started. I just want to say, this is the fourth session of the webinar series dedicated to the use of international standards in regulatory decision-making. We appreciate the opportunity to continue to provide these educational webinars as part of the medical devices regulatory convergence projects. We thank all of you for your continuous interest and participation. We could not do this without the speakers and those that have joined us and provided their expertise to give us an opportunity to exchange information and learn from one another. Today, we have an opportunity to hear from industry and our regulatory partners, and we do thank them for joining us today. We're going to hear them about how they use conformity assessment to demonstrate compliance with requirements. We encourage the participation of our colleagues, regulators, industry to engage in these activities going forward. And as we heard from all the speakers so far, using standards helps create systems that are more harmonized and more efficient, which improves quality and safety of medical devices overall. Thank you to everyone who have joined us today. And with that, I'll turn it back to Sandra. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Besa. So now let's get started. Stephen, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Sandra, and thank you, Besa. Good day, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here and to moderate this panel focusing on conformity assessment. It's an honor to facilitate this session with this set of esteemed panelists that I consider to be the subject matter experts on the topic. And as a member of the coalition, we feel very fortunate to have the opportunity to have assembled this masterclass within the context of the webinar series. So as you have seen, there has been a logical flow of the information presented throughout the webinar series. In session 1, just to recap, we began with how one medical device regulatory authority, the US FDA, and their Center for Devices and Radiological Health, represented by VESA, uses standards and conformity assessment to advance their legislative mandate. In session 2, we reviewed how the World Health Organization and the Pan American Health Organizations recommend that medical device regulatory authorities use international standards as an essential component of regulatory reliance and recognition. We also heard from the World Trade Organization on how the provisions of the Technical Barriers to Trade Agreement are components of good regulatory practice policies. And we also heard about the treaty and legal obligations assumed by the WTO members, which includes national regulatory authorities, with commitments on the development of technical regulations, standards, and conformity assessment requirements. We also heard in that session from the standards developing organizations on technical committees and standards of relevance for the medical technology sector, including regulatory authorities, industry, and other stakeholders. In session 3, we heard from the national standards bodies that provide a link between national standards activities and international standardization efforts with a view to increasing public and private participation in them, which brings us to today. A large focus of the preceding sessions was on the rules, the criteria with which to be complied. As we learned, the rules include 1, the technical regulations, which are the documents with which compliance is mandatory, and rules also include 2, standards, which are the documents with which compliance is voluntary. But as we saw, the mandatory technical regulations can, and preferably do, make reference to the standards as a dynamic way to ensure that the rules are as up-to-date and at pace with the available technology as possible. Conformity assessment is the sphere of activity and the set of tools focused on demonstrating compliance with the rules. So just a story to launch this panel. Near the beginning of my career in the telecom sector, I was a participant at one of the meetings of the Inter-American Telecommunications Commission, CTEL, which I believe was taking place in Lima, Peru, perhaps 1999. And there was a days-long session on the CTEL Mutual Recognition Agreement, the MRA, which is one intergovernmental policy mechanism in the conformity assessment space. And although I was trained as an electrical engineer and was already active in international standards work and no stranger to acronyms, my head was spinning with all the new terminology. And I had the good fortune to have about an hour-long coffee break between sessions with a representative of NIST, who on the back of a napkin mapped out the landscape of conformity assessment from which I have benefited over the past 20 years and to which Gordon has contributed substantially. So in this panel, my intent is that the essence of that foundational explanation on conformity assessment can be shared, but I am also still an eternal student. And so we are going to focus our attention now on conformity assessment with the view of government, with the view of the medical technology manufacturing industry, with the perspectives of the conformity assessment sector itself, and then we're going to examine a particular conformity assessment scheme. I will save the bios as I introduce each speaker, but I just briefly introduced them now. Mr. Gordon Gillerman from the U.S. National Institute for Standards and Technology, NIST, Ms. Elizabeth George from Philips, wearing her several hats, Mr. Martin Michelot from the TIC Council, and Mr. Stephen Margis of UL, who is also the chair of the IEC EECB scheme. With that, I will ask our panelists to kindly turn off their videos with the exception of the active presenter, and we'll begin. So Gordon Gillerman is the director of the Standards Coordination Office at the National Institute of Standards and Technology, NIST, and he is also the U.S. Department of Commerce Standards Executive, leading NIST's work in standards coordination and the National Voluntary Laboratory Accreditation Program. Gordon supports extensive standards development and advises federal agencies and other stakeholders on standards and conformity assessment policy. Gordon has extensive standards experience across a wide range of critical issues, including homeland security, safety, health, and protection of the environment. Gordon is an expert on conformity assessment systems design, an advisor to the U.S. Trade Representative on technical barriers to trade and related trade agreements, and he has collaborated across the standards community to develop standards-based solutions for national priorities throughout his career. Gordon provided direct support in the drafting and negotiation of the technical barriers to trade chapter of the U.S.-Mexico-Canada agreement. With that, Gordon, it's a pleasure to have you here. Over to you.
Thank you, Stephen, for that kind introduction. So what Stephen didn't tell you is that I started my life as a product safety engineer and worked in the adoption of international standards into the United States for both the computer products world as well as the electrical medical device world. And during that work, I became one of the first FDA accredited persons to assist private sector companies in applying to the FDA and bringing their devices to the marketplace. So this is home for me, and I'm very happy to be here. And I thank you all for inviting me and being important to be a part of this important panel. So one of the real questions here is, what am I doing here? So I'm not a medical device regulator. I'm not a conformity assessment body. I'm not an accreditation body. And I'm not a standards development organization. What we are in our office at the National Institute of Standards and Technology, which is the National Metrology Institute of the United States of America, is we are the coordinator of efforts and activities across the US federal government and with the private sector in standardization and conformity assessment. Our work is broad. It involves training programs for US government officials. It involves standards and conformity assessment consultation directly to federal agencies, including the Food and Drug Administration in their pilot program for the accreditation of conformity assessment, yielding high quality, competent, accredited laboratories with test results that will be used in the application process for medical device manufacturers. And for the National Institute of Occupational Safety and Health's National Personal Protective Technology Laboratory in respiratory protection, which during COVID has become a very important part of the fabric of testing and certification in the US government. We promote the use of not just standards for products, which I think you've heard about already, as Stephen's described, the use of technical standards for products as a way to fulfill regulatory requirements for the demonstration of safe and effective medical devices. But we also promote the use of international standards for the conformity assessment activities of the systemic approach to prove that medical devices meet regulatory requirements. Conformity assessment is at its heart the prove it process for products, services, and indeed the competency of people for regulators, society, and the market. Conformity assessment is a wealth of different kinds of activities. It's not just certification, it's not just approval, but it's individual activities involved in the evaluation of the objects, or in this case, the medical devices, conformity with international standards, if international standards are used as the basis in whole or in part as regulatory requirements, but also the determination of whether the results, the data developed during those evaluations, complies with the requirements for the marketplace, for the regulators, and to bring safe and effective medical devices to our societies. Conformity assessment also involves activities that assist in having confidence that manufactured products that are actually going into healthcare facilities, that are being used by doctors with patients, continue to conform to those important requirements. Conformity assessment is beyond a focus on the product. Conformity assessment also focuses on the organizations that perform the conformity assessment as well. Through activities, typically called accreditation, there's a means for demonstrating that laboratories and certification organizations and accreditation organizations themselves operate with competence in their technical areas, have an underlying risk and quality management system that allows regulators and society and the market to believe the results of these conformity assessments. Conformity assessment doesn't present a one-size-fits-all solutions. We work with conformity assessment organizations, and we work with federal government agencies to help them identify approaches to conformity assessment that are going to be efficient and effective, meet their mission needs, meet the market's needs, and make way for a manufacturing community that has a reduced bar of entry, not because the requirements are low, but because the requirements are as the same as they can be across markets, and the prove it process is interoperable. One of the important cornerstones to think about is, if you're a device manufacturer and you're selling your product in 100 countries, if you have to prove that you comply with 100 different sets of technical requirements and build 100 different products to do it and manage 100 different supply chains of components and assembly, you're going to spend resources doing that might be better used in doing research on the next life-saving product. So as you've already heard in standards, as we pull together a consensus on what the minimum requirements for the safety and effectiveness of these devices are and publish them as voluntary consensus standards, and have regulatory authorities, society, and the market rely on these standards to set the bar for performance and effectiveness, we also need to think about consolidating the prove it process. Because just like the standard situation, if we can bring the prove it process closer together across our markets, we can allow these manufacturers to conserve resources as they demonstrate that their products are safe and effective, that they have an underlying quality and risk management system that satisfies the need, in order to focus those resources that they aren't spending proving this again and again and again to a diversity of different markets and regulators into research on the next cutting edge life-saving product for our societies. This should really be the focal point of the benefit. Medical devices are meant to help people and save lives, and the more we can do to streamline that process of bringing global confidence to the safety and effectiveness of these products, the more benefits today we can bring through quicker access to those products in the global marketplace, but also looking forward, allowing these manufacturers to use their cutting edge technical resources to save our lives tomorrow with new medical devices that haven't been thought of yet, that need to be developed, that need research. And those resources need to be conserved by the manufacturing community. Well thought out conformity assessment programs that are highly interoperable across markets don't just conserve resources for the manufacturer, they conserve resources for the regulators. Regulators can have confidence in the results of conformity assessment undertaken in other places. Those results can be leveraged and used to allow products to be approved for home markets and help the citizens of your countries. And there is no one-size-fits-all system. And even if our systems are different, we can find ways of converging on some of the individual conformity assessment activities to save resources for the manufacturing community, for our society, and for the regulators. One of the services that we provide for the agencies is indeed what Stephen mentioned, conformity assessment system design. My organization has designed conformity assessment systems for a range of products and services, from the efficiency of toilets to save water for our world, all the way to countermeasures for aircraft against shoulder-fired rockets and other means of aggression. We've worked closely with health and safety regulators from the Occupational Safety and Health Administration in the United States, the FDA, and NIOSH and PPTL, as I described, for respiratory protective products. We worked closely with the FDA in the design and development of a pilot program called ASCO that helps medical device manufacturers test products to FDA recognized standards, which you've already heard about. These international standards and the test results from the testing in these laboratories can be used to demonstrate the compliance of these same medical devices for other regulatory systems. They increase the certainty that these evaluations of characteristics like safety, electromagnetic compatibility, biocompatibility have been done with competence and integrity by laboratories and conformity assessment bodies. The FDA leverages accreditation. The accreditation bodies that participate in the FDA's program leverage international peer assessment to international standards for accreditation. They leverage international standards for laboratory operations, ISO IEC 17025, in order to have confidence that laboratories do their work well. But as I said, there's no one-size-fits-all program. Recently, my organization has been involved in the development of an ASTM standard for face barriers, or what I call community masks. During the pandemic, these are the masks that we've all worn to go to the grocery store, to control us as a source control, to make sure that we're minimizing the spread of the pandemic. The development of the standard was undertaken with stakeholders and regulators from across the country and around the world. And indeed, the standard itself has a set of conformity assessment requirements that asks manufacturers to demonstrate that they meet the testing requirements in this ASTM 3502 standard at an accredited laboratory whose scope of accreditation includes the particle filtering efficiency tests in the standard, and asks the manufacturers to issue declarations of conformity in a very formal sense to tell the world that their products have been tested to this standard and conform, and actually tell the levels of performance from particle filtering efficiency and breathability or comfort. This ability to have different approaches to conformity assessment while still leveraging international standards allows us to create interoperable systems of conformity assessment and reduce the burden on manufacturers and allow them to spend more of their resources innovating new products for the marketplace that have a benefit for our society. So one of the things we've learned as we've approached working with the agencies on conformity assessment is how to think about designing systems. And as we look at the core principles of conformity assessment system design, we think that confidence is the key. So if you're designing the prove-it process has to meet the confidence needs of regulatory authorities, the marketplace, and society. If we over-design the system, the costs will be too much, and we'll spend too much resources on conformity assessment, more than the confidence needs. If we under-design these systems and we miss fulfilling the confidence needs of the regulators, the market, and society, then we've just failed, because then we're spending conformity assessment resources and nobody cares. In a well-designed conformity assessment system that's based on international conformity assessment standards and run with competency, good risk management, and good quality management, the regulatory agency benefits by conserving their own resources, focusing on things like clinical effectiveness of products, and indeed research to help their own citizens and their society. Society benefits by ready access to effective medical devices. And industry benefits by reducing the number of flaming hoops of fire that they have to jump through in order to get safe and effective products into the global marketplace. I want to leave you with some resources that are going to be put up in the chat. Our guidance to federal agencies on their participation and use of standards and conformity assessment is in a document we call OMB A119. Our NIST guidance on conformity assessment that's published in our Federal Register or our Gazette will also be posted. And I want you to look at two special publications that are published by my organization. One on the ABCs of conformity assessment, which talks about the basics of what is conformity assessment. What are these activities of testing, inspection, certification, and accreditation, and how do they work and how can they work together? And a second one that's relatively new and I think a little groundbreaking, which is considerations for US federal agencies that I think can be good for regulators from around the world to take into consideration. And these are considerations as you look to use conformity assessment and design conformity assessment systems. One of the core considerations that we found is stakeholder engagement in the development, design, and implementation of these conformity assessment systems. And I'm very proud that we've been a part of this work with the FDA in the rollout of the ASCA pilot program. And the FDA has done a terrific job of engaging the stakeholders, both formally and informally, at every step of the process in the design, the development, the conceptualization, and the implementation of the ASCA pilot program. Thank you for your time and attention.
Thank you very much, Gordon. And we will save the questions for the Q&A session at the end. But I did wish to highlight that Sandra has shared in the chat the 4 documents that Gordon mentioned, and that we as a coalition have already agreed to work with NIST to develop the Spanish language versions of these documents. And they'll be available hopefully on the NIST website, but at least also on the coalition website. So thank you very much, Gordon. With that, I'm going to shift over to Elizabeth George. Ms. George works for Philips, managing and supporting the global standards and regulations work for more than 50 design and manufacturing facilities around the world. She and her team support development, awareness, and deployment throughout the life cycle of products and processes for medical devices and consumer products. And these range from MRI machines, X-ray, and defibrillators to Sonicare toothbrushes and humidifiers. Ms. George is actively engaged in trade associations and standards development organizations, including ANSI, AAMI, AdvaMed, MITA, NEMA, DITA, and the GMTA. She actively represents Philips and industry in technical activities, including human factors, usability, digital health, and cybersecurity. Regarding her work pertaining to the IEC, Ms. George also participates in the U.S. National Committee, its council, its Conformity Assessment Policy Committee, and the IECEE. Elizabeth presently holds leadership positions in a number of these organizations, including the board of directors for ANSI and AAMI, as a vice chair of industry, and she sits as an industry representative on the FDA's Patient Advisory Committee. Elizabeth, it's a pleasure to have you here. Over to you.
Thank you very much. Hello, everybody. As was stated, I am Elizabeth George. I have worked for Philips for quite a long time, and I'm very excited today to be a part of this panel and this opportunity to meet with all of you. I want to first thank all of my colleagues for their engagement on this panel, as well as the stakeholders that are participating, and I know we're all looking forward to your questions. Many of today's panel members I've known for a long time, and I think what you're going to hear is a little bit of a consistent message about the importance and value of standards, as well as our perspectives on how it supports conformity assessment. As was stated, Philips is a very active member in our trade associations, whether it be DITA, the Global Diagnostic Imaging Health IT Radiation Therapy, nice long name, or the Global Medical Device Technology Alliance, as well as many local regional trade associations, including those in Brazil and Canada, Mexico, and around the world. We're very active in standards developing organizations from IEC, ISO. We are in the Consumer Technology Alliance with AAMI, NEMA, ASTM, and the many, many, many more alphabet soup that you are all getting accustomed to every time you attend these meetings. As was mentioned, we are an active member as well in the ANSI organization, which really permits our US colleagues within our company to fully engage in all the international standardization activities. We also try to engage in organizations like the IMDRF, which is the International Medical Device Regulators Forum. What this allows us to do is via stakeholder meetings, we can support the development of educational workshops. We can support the opportunity to meet with the 10-member jurisdiction regulators to discuss what regulatory challenges we as an industry as a whole are having globally. It allows us to share best practices as well as those horrible work experiences that we all face during design and development and conformity assessment. We actively engaged recently with the Inter-American Coalition for Regulatory Convergence. It's been a great opportunity for us. We participate both directly as Philips, but also through our trade associations like AdvaMed that Stephen represents. We obviously are very busy. It keeps us aware of what's going on around the world. And it is important for us to do that because we design our products around the world, we manufacture our products around the world, and we distribute our products around the world. It is important to understand what is the medical sector. It's not just the products that are utilized in hospitals. It's products that are used in health and wellness, in the home, while you're running down the street wearing your special devices to monitor how well things are going. So they're quite a variety. They're in the hospital, they're in the clinic, they're at the point of care. And it's not, but what is it not? It's not drugs and it's not the people. So it is the electromechanical software devices. These devices can range from things like advanced molecular imaging products, computed tomography devices, ventilators, defibrillators, patient monitors, but it also can be software and the various services to ensure that those products work safely and effectively the way that our customers want them to. Those are the types of things that Philips manufactures, but there's also a lot of implants. There are coronary stents, there are orthopedic devices such as artificial hips or knees. There's those 3D printers to help with replacement human tissue as well as replacement parts for the devices. So products range from things as low risk as Band-Aids and tongue depressors up to those very high risk implants and defibrillators and ventilators and things like that. So many medical technologies are globally recognized more recently, really because of what's been going on with COVID. PPE, ventilators, and diagnostic kits came to the forefront. And I think one of the key challenges that we all saw is how do we get product that's in one jurisdiction to another jurisdiction if it hasn't been fully vetted through the regulatory scheme? One way obviously is recognition of the conformity and the testing. The US FDA helped us by creating a user emergency use authorization. Sorry, went brain dead there for a minute. That allowed us to quickly show through testing and verification and validation that we in fact met the requirements and were able to quickly get those into the hands of patients and clinicians. It should also be noted that there are, for those of you that are not in the med tech industry, you might not realize that the scope of things include even sometimes your iPhone or your Android phone because of the apps that you download. And one of the things that needs to be realized is sometimes those platforms are not necessarily validated to the same level that we might have as our medical devices. So it's important for us as a medical device company, if we're going to create an application, that we understand the platform it's going to be used on. And if those devices have been tested in a standard way, whether it's an Android phone or an ABC phone or an Apple phone or whoever's phone, that we know what its base testing and assessment was, so that when we put our apps on there, we know how they're going to perform. We know that continuous updates, whether it be on the hardware side or on the software side, we know how those are going to affect us. So like almost everything these days, the medical device supply chain is global. There is no single country that can or does manufacture every single medical device from the start of the base components, whether it be the materials or the printed circuit boards or the electromechanical elements and components. So our goal as an industry is we want to be innovative so that we can design, manufacture, and deliver new technologies that are safe and improve the lives of patients everywhere. And we want to do this as expeditiously as possible. And we want to remove any unnecessary obstacles that we have to get these technologies to the patients, to the clinician. At events like this one, it's important to acknowledge and attempt to address what are the barriers that we have that prevent us from making that happen. It's important that we address where there needs to be good regulatory practices. We need to make sure that the principles that the WTO has addressed regarding technical barriers and technical agreements are addressed. We want to make sure that things get properly aligned and that we understand where we might need to have some differences. For example, there may be a practice of medicine difference that requires us to do something different, but we really should try to break down those barriers as soon as possible and as effectively as possible. Customs and trade facilitation, including mutual recognition through standards and conformity assessment, is critical. As I said, the good regulatory practices, trying to align them and embracing of the standards so that there can be that recognition. International alignment on what the regulations, standards, and conformity assessment are key to ensure that we get those devices in a cost-effective manner, in a timely manner, to the resources that need them, while ensuring that they are fully safe and compliant. To share a little bit of an example from my company's perspective directly, we may design a new product. One of the key inputs to that design is international standards. We use those in the development of the standards. We then execute the required testing and inspection to those standards using test labs that are recognized, like Intertek or UL or any of the others that are have been properly certified to those standards. We want to sell those products globally. We potentially might even want to develop those products in different jurisdictions or manufacture them in different jurisdictions. So one of the key things is our design and manufacturing sites, because they are located around the world, we make sure that they are managed under certified quality management systems, recognizing ISO 13485 and for the quality management system, and recognizing risk management, ISO 14971, so that these sites are certified not only for the country that they are located in, but to support us to be able to sell around the world. For Philips, as was mentioned in my introduction, we have more than 50 locations around the world where we do design and manufacture. Many times we manufacture the same product in multiple locations so that we are able to get them as quickly as possible to the end users. It's important for us to make sure that we have an alignment and consistency in how we perform that design, manufacture, and build, Because as Gordon said earlier, the last thing I want to do is design 10 different solutions or even as many as 100 different solutions, having to test them and then distribute them because it's not cost effective for anybody. It means that you're going to have to pay much higher cost because of just the overall volume aspect of it. Another aspect that I wanted to share is that, you know, another example is for both the US FDA and the European notified body competent authorities, we're expected to prove our conformance to mandatory as well as voluntary standards. The way in which we do that, we can attest to these standards via the use of a declaration of conformity, or we might utilize the FDA's ASCA program. Or we might actually have to submit a full test data and report as a part of our submissions. It's important that as a manufacturer, I work closely with my regulators, either directly via a pre-submission type meeting so that we understand what it is we can do, how we can do it most effectively, supporting those standards, the conformity assessment requirements. Or we sometimes do it indirectly, as mentioned earlier, through our trade associations or through organizations like IMDRF or the GHWP. Regulators who participate in the standards development process really support the future planning of those standards. It helps them to better understand what controls they need to put in place from a regulatory standpoint. But I think what is really most valuable for us is if we can have the same test data and the same certification utilized across multiple regions, it obviously supports speed to market. One of the things that IMDRF is really focused on right now, they already implemented what was called the MDSAP program, which is the Medical Device Single Audit Program. They're now focusing on opportunities to address a single review program, and we're really looking forward to it becoming a reality. In some of the regions around the world, we do face technical regulation challenges with conformity assessment because there isn't alignment. In our sector, what we're finding is some of our regulators, for example, that we deal with US FDA and Visa for Brazil and MPA for China, they do have different regulations and we understand that. But because their structure and their experience level varies significantly, for example, the FDA has been around since 1976, has been heavily engaged in standards. They have hundreds of people involved in the development of standards. While on the other end of the spectrum, we have in the late 90s, China and Brazil's regulations were created. That their levels of resources available, their ability to understand some of the activities and their level of engagement caused them to ask more questions. And so we understand that, but I think it's valuable, again, if we start to have more people getting involved in the standards development, helping to develop those standardized test report forms, which are utilized in the conformity assessment arena, so that we can support the limitation of having to do retesting, recertification, additional labeling, additional time to market, and additional costs. So I would like to mention as well that the EU, we are facing as well some technical challenges. The recognition that they have with regards to certain standards and how the conformity is being done causes us some hurdles. But I know that everybody all around the world is really interested in aligning and trying to get there, because we wouldn't have these kind of meetings if that wasn't the case. So I'm really pleased to see that we are having this open discussion across many jurisdictions. I think that there's a great opportunity to leverage some best practices, including whether it be mutual recognition of testing, whether it be recognizing programs under the ILAC, testing once, submitting the same data to multiple jurisdictions. I know my ultimate desire is test once, submit once, recognize globally. We're definitely not there yet, but I think that all of us working together, this brain trust will be invaluable to making it happen. So in closing, as a medical device representative, as I said, my desire is test once, submit once, recognize globally, and be truly international, because that's what we all really are. And I want to thank you again, and looking forward to everybody's questions at the end.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. And I note that Elizabeth's remarks were verbal, as were Gordon's. There is no PowerPoint, but a lot of the references that she makes are to information that we have on the Inter-American Coalition website. This recording, of course, will be recorded and made available on the website. And Gordon's presentation, his remarks referred to the 4 documents that are available in the chat, and also which we will make available in Spanish. And so we'll save the remaining questions for the end of the session. And I'd like to turn now to our next panelist. Martin Michelot is the Executive Director for Europe at the TIC Council, where he leads the organization's advocacy work towards the European Union and coordinates global advocacy on digitalization issues. A graduate in international relations and European affairs from Sciences Po Lyon, Michelot was previously Deputy Director of the Europem Institute for European Policy, a Prague-based think tank focusing on European affairs, where he provided strategic advice to governments on various EU issues. He has also worked for the Institut Jacques Delors, the German Marshall Fund of the United States, and the Brookings Institution in various research positions on transatlantic relations and European integration issues. Martin, it's a pleasure to have you with us. Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Muchas gracias, Stephen, por la amable introducción. Quiero agradecer a los organizadores por la invitación.
I would like to thank for the invite to participate in this wonderful debate. It is a great pleasure to be able to do this in Spanish about the principles of assessment with such distinguished participants. So let us begin. Let me say very quickly a little introduction of what the TIC Council is about. It is a commercial association, international commercial association that represents the inspection, the certification workers. We represent the interests of more than 100 members that operate in more than 170 countries all throughout the world. I live in Brussels, that's where the seat is. This is where we have our main office, but I also have colleagues all around the world who are representing the diversity of activities that our sector is engaged in. So on the slide, I'm introducing the mission of the TIC Council. Let me insist on the relevance of the work that association does in the exchange of best practices to make certain that our sector is offering the highest quality level possible to all of the customers. So very briefly, what is a conformity assessment about? Conformity assessments prove that a product is in compliance with a specific quality level, as well as sustainability level and safety level. So conformity assessment includes tests, inspections, certifications, auditing, as well as training all throughout the training or the supply chain, from the design all the way until the point it is sold. Conformity assessment entities can only participate in consulting activities if they don't participate in the assessment of the product itself, so as to prevent any conflict of interest. So here are the different types of conformity assessment according to the needs. The higher the risk related to a non-compliance, the more the rigor and independence in the design of a conformity assessment. The first part is related to when the producer presents a declaration of what the product is about and that it's in compliance. The second part happens when the buyer or the user makes a decision to be in compliance. And the third one is the independent organizations that are not related to the product directly, as like with the producer or the buyer. This independence offers an additional level of credibility and trustworthiness. Providers are exposed to economic pressures to sell their products as quickly as possible. And problems related to time to market have to be balanced with making certain that the safety, the health, and the environment are honored, respected. So it is the responsibility of regulators to find the balance, to strike the balance. It's up to them to see the type of product and the needs that are included so as to achieve the trust level that is necessary. So about the first time, when there is a low risk of non-compliance, there's enough trust that the providers understand the technical requirement as well as the regulations and understand the market, and that the industry has a track record of compliance. Then we come to the fines, the appropriate fines for placing products in the market that are not in compliance, like civil or penal fines. And finally, market surveillance to quickly withdraw products that are not in compliance. And in Europe, this is one of the problems that we are currently facing. To make a comparison of the third part, because the third part is resorted to when the risk of non-compliance is high, and it is important to have a higher level of confidence. The third part has a greater level of responsibility as well. Accreditation makes certain that there's technical competency through detailed auditings so as to be able to establish whether the conformity assessment entities are operating correctly and according to the international standards. I could speak more about the accreditation, which is something that might be sometimes controversial in our circles, but we could leave that perhaps for the Q&A if you wish. And there are some other ways in which we can make certain that there's competence for, I think Steve Merges will speak about peer review later on in the ICE program. But speaking about the third part as well, the governments obviously play a paramount role in the system that it has to incorporate the third parties in the surveillance, in the supervision, in a market-based approach. This is a way in which producers can trust third-party entities. And in order for them to trust in said services, regulators and the governments need to trust the technical skill and competency of the conformity assessment organizations. An efficient way in which this is achieved is to trust in the accreditation processes, as it's been said, and therefore the process to get a certification have to be rigorous enough so as to guarantee coherent results. All throughout the world, we see that the policies that take advantage of conformity assessment that are created by third parties can grant quicker access to the world market, reduce compliance costs, at the same time are offering safe and profitable products for the market in a quick way. The experience has proven that the regulatory frameworks that take advantage of third-party involvement can guarantee sanitary products to be in compliance with all of the safety, quality, cybersecurity, privacy, and all regulations. And so it saves the government's money as well. But unfortunately, the regulatory structure of certain countries is still demanding that all conformity assessments and compliance activities are carried out at the national level, and in many cases, only through governmental agencies that are granted the power to do so. So this makes an approval process to be very slow, expensive, more than what's necessary, so as to guarantee the technical safety of products and medical devices. There are companies that have great resources, like the ability to expand services, and what's even more important than that, a wide array of technical knowledge all throughout the world that have been acquired through years of experience. Therefore, some people can offer innovative technology that can render services in a profitable way quickly. In that case, if governments trust, they can save resources and they can focus on the surveillance from a market-based perspective. And the experience of many countries, especially Europe and North America, has proven how important it is for the tech sector to be involved in the regulatory frameworks and the savings that can be achieved by the regulators when they trust in the ITC's sector to make certain that the political objectives are achieved and while keeping a high level of technical competency and technical knowledge. As a matter of fact, facts have proven that regulators that follow the ITCs to comply their objectives have great savings. Recently, an OSHA study from the US estimated that when there is a regulating program that depends on conformity assessment of third parties can cost around $1 million a year. And if OSHA stopped depending on third independent parties, then they would need to spend approximately $360 million a year to keep the program alive, which would make a considerable difference in the level of resources needed. And let's bring this closer to home. After the COVID-19 pandemic, we learned several things. An emergency like the pandemic have shown the value of striking private and public alliances that are solid and efficient to have a guarantee of medical devices. We were also able to see that the accreditation entities with the participation of independent certification bodies can provide the ability, the skills, the specialization that was necessary to support the governments and to prevent medical devices to be traded without the correct supervision. Our sector has also supported several producers so as to help them devote their production to the personal protection equipment or other devices that were so necessary in the pandemic. And the response to COVID-19 has provided how important it's been for regulators, for producers, and the industry to support the availability of devices for the diagnosis, the prevention, and the follow-up of the disease.
Una breve nota sobre cómo utilizan la evaluación
A
de las
brief note on how they are using conformity assessments, the different government entities in Europe and the United States. Well, in Europe, market access of health-related products that have a higher risk is being done through third parties, independent third parties that are called notified organizations in Europe. This system of notified organizations requires certain technical knowledge, and there is a competition between those organizations that improves the quality of the service as well as the efficiency of the service. And how does this work in reality? Well, the authority of the member states of the European Union has the responsibility to notify to the organizations based on the principles that were stipulated in a decision made in 2008. Once all the organizations, all the notified organizations are notified, they must comply with minimum set of requirements. You know, they have the supervision, the surveillance of these is done by the health authorities of the different member states of the European Union. The complexity of this conformity assessment and the level of intervention or participation of these organizations depends on the risks that are associated to a specific product. In the United States, the FDA is increasing their trust in third parties with new initiatives to improve the system as a whole. And in the United States, the TIC sector is including now a new initiative of the FDA called the ASCA program to certify all the test laboratories so that they work together with the standards and regulations of the different entities. The FDA experts will talk about this ASCA program in a moment, so I'm just going to limit myself to say that from the TIC Council, we do believe this is an excellent initiative, and we have worked together with the people from the FDA from the beginning of the conception of this program. And so we believe that the presentation and approval time of these devices, if it's done by a laboratory approved by ASCA, is going to be reduced by far. There are many other examples in the market, but these experiences of both Europe and the United States show how the TIC sector is important in all the regulatory frameworks and the standard frameworks so that all the technical documents are available and can be attainable. Just to wrap this up, I would like to reinforce that it's very important for me for the countries to have the necessary policies to get efficient regulatory results. The good regulatory practices that are promoted versus a regulatory environment that is open, transparent, predictable, and responsible. And by doing so, these best practices provide the necessary basis for regulatory convergence between the different jurisdictions. And by allowing the convergence in this subject matter, the good practices, the best practices facilitate the necessary mechanisms so that the conformity assessment bodies can offer unique type of services that comply with the different regulations. The successful program for a unique audit of medical devices, MDSAP, shows this because they are allowing just one review of the whole quality system of the manufacturer, and that is accepted in many different jurisdictions. And this is my last slide. And well, for this, I would like to restate that the policies need to take advantage of the conformity made by third parties whenever possible. The manufacturers of health products normally trust in all the mechanisms that they have for conformity assessments by third party to facilitate the access to the market. This facilitates the marketing timeline and also helps us to control compliance costs. And here in the TIC sectors, well, we're still committed to work very closely with all the political groups responsible, the industry, and the accreditation organizations worldwide to develop a conformity system ecosystem that will take advantage of the whole resources and experience that they already exist in the sector. All of this so as to reach a common objective, to make progress in timely access to safe and innovative medical technologies that will save lives, and will bring protection and be efficient for patients. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Marta. Excellent presentation. And one of the major benefits that we find of the TIC Council is to demonstrate that the sector of conformity assessment isn't just its own universe and its own sphere, but that the service providers, be they the laboratories, the testing laboratories, the certification bodies, the inspection bodies, are organized in the fashion of the TIC Council and able to have positions and debate in fora like this one to talk about the work as a sector, and it's not just an agglomeration of different test labs. Very instructive, very didactic. Appreciate your remarks, and we also have some questions coming in that we'll address in the final Q&A session. Thank you. So I'm going to transition now to our next speaker. Stephen Marges serves as Director of Conformity Assessment Programs for UL. In this capacity, he is responsible for program and policy management of UL-operated conformity assessment schemes globally. Mr. Marges is a dedicated conformity assessment professional with 30+ years of experience in the field of global conformity assessment. He has strong foundational beliefs in a strategic approach to global conformity assessment, targeted at streamlining market access and acceptance, as well as the concept of national treatment for conformity assessment service providers. His professional experience includes technical, educational, operational, and strategic management roles in the field of conformity assessment. Throughout his career, Mr. Marges has been a prolific contributor and influencer in his field and an active voice in the community via his participation and leadership in the United States National Committee to the IEC and within the IEC itself. Stephen, it's a pleasure to have you here. Thank you very much. Over to you.
Thank you, Stephen. Much appreciated. As has been said by some of the other speakers, I'm honored to be on the panel with a group of experts that I've been associated with for a number of years. I learn from them every day, and together we all have similar interests in making sure that we can bring products to the world. So as noted by Stephen, my role is a UL Director of Conformity Assessment Programs, but today I'm here to speak to you about my other role, which is the chair of the IECEE. The IECEE is an international conformity assessment system built to ensure compliance and confidence amongst its stakeholders. That's a theme that we've already heard. We've heard about the interest and the need for trust and confidence. Gordon framed this very well for us at his early comments. It was further solidified in the comments from Elizabeth about the view of that from a manufacturer standpoint. And as a conformity assessment service provider, I share the message that the inclusion of all stakeholders in developing requirements suitable to meet the needs across all of these stakeholder groups is essential for a successful conformity assessment system to bring valued products to market.
Steve, I think we lost you. You're on mute.
Thank you, Steve. So I'm going to start by just introducing you briefly to the backdrop that you've gone through over the last couple sessions and how it relates to the organization of the IEC. What you see on the screen here is the governance structure of the International Electrotechnical Commission. The International Electrotechnical Commission is responsible for standards and conformity assessment system development for electrical and electronic products. In particular, the three colored screens at the bottom reflect the pieces that make this so critical. To the left, you see the Standards Management Board. There's been a lot of discussion about the need for international compliance, development of standards that allow products to be built once for use as much as possible across different geographies.
Even sorry to interject. I'm not seeing your screen projected. Just want to make sure. We can double check. I see you. There we go. Thank you.
All right, thank you. So to repeat, I guess, at the bottom here in the red stream, you see a group of activities around what is called the Standards Management Board. And the Standards Management Board is where the work in technical committees is occurring to ensure the development of compliant standards for the marketplace. One very relevant to the medical industry and the IEC space is TC62, responsible for developing standards such as IEC 60601 and its related corollaries and related standards. In the middle, you see the Market Strategy Board, and the Market Strategy Board, as Gordon noted, if we can properly deploy our resources and align requirements, we can allow ourselves to look forward and look to the future. The Market Strategy Board of the IEC holds the responsibility of envisioning what future trends are in front of us so that we can, as much as possible, try to ensure that standardization occurs at a pace that keeps up with technological advancement. And then finally, the area we're going to speak about in this short presentation is in the green stream. And the green area is dealing with the Conformity Assessment Board and its related systems. You see a number of them down there. And really what they reflect is the different needs of the marketplace. In particular, the IEC has systems for explosive atmospheres. It has systems for renewable energy. It has systems for component quality. In our particular focus that we will be talking about is in the area of electrical and electronic products. So briefly, what is the IECEE system about? The focus and the attention of the IECEE system is to facilitate trade by eliminating duplication of testing and providing market access. As Elizabeth noted, industry is very much interested in bringing the best products to all of us in our world geographies. In order to do that, having harmonized requirements and the ability to reduce duplication allows industry to bring better, more efficient products to market more quickly. The IECEE, through the use of international standards, in particular IEC standards, and then having a process around which the conformity assessment against those standards can be applied, is the backdrop for the IECEE. As noted, the second bullet reflects that national adoption and use of IEC standards is one of the foundations of the system. In order to have testing be aligned and be able to be facilitated from market to market, it's essential to have similar protocols in place. The IEC standards serve as the basis for that. But we recognize that in the international markets, there are national considerations that must be taken into account. We deal with those as what we call national differences in an attempt to run one test with consideration to the various national differences at the same time, again, to reduce cost and reduce time to market. This does not take away the importance of those local national differences and requirements, but it does hopefully emphasize that in order to have a successful program like this, we need the engagement and early participation of various stakeholders in the standards process. I know you've talked about that in previous sessions. I hope to reiterate that as an example, one of my roles is participation on the US National Committee in my host country. In doing so, I'm proud to say that we do have government regulators who participate in our process. NIST is an active member within our community. The FDA is an active representative in our community. And in doing so, by participating early in the process, these organizations can influence the requirements to make sure that it's not just about international standards, but about international standards that meet the national regulatory mandates of the organizations that ultimately will allow and ensure access of products to your given marketplace. The next foundation of the IECE is mutual acceptance of deliverables. On here, they're referred to as IECE certificates and the related test reports. We'll talk more about that in a moment, but essentially, there are many different approaches to market. Martin, in his presentation for the TIC Council, reflected that depending on the level of risk associated with a product type, there may be different approaches to market. In some cases, a manufacturer may be self-declaring. In order of that self-declaration to be made, they're normally performing testing or other activities as part of their supporting technical dossier. The IECEE serves as a means to have a third party interject in that process and provide test reports independently to the manufacturer that can be used as an additional support document for those types of dossiers. In other situations, a local national system may require third-party certification by an approved certification body in the national system. Similarly, mutual acceptance in that case would reflect a situation where testing is done by one of the member organizations. That member organization issues a certificate and test report, which is transmitted to a second body, a receiving body, who does a technical review of that file for the purpose of issuing a national certification mark in accordance with those same core testing and certification activities. Again, driving efficiency to market, reducing cost, and reducing duplication of efforts. Finally, the last principle of the IECE is peer assessment. Martin used the words accreditation a little bit earlier, and while accreditation plays a role in many conformity assessment systems, we find within the IECE the necessity to have peer assessment. The added value of peer assessment is that for organizations that are conformity assessment stakeholders, to have confidence in the system, to review and recognize and accept tests that were done by other bodies. Having peer assessment of organizations amongst each other ensures that the assessments that are performed by people who know this work very well, that do it every day, and have an opportunity to assess the activities of the other participating organizations to make sure there's suitable confidence before they are accepted as a member and on an ongoing basis. So the process, we won't focus very much on this because I spoke about it a moment ago, but this slide, which you'll have available to you, essentially says that a manufacturer goes to an issuing body, receives the report and certificate, then has the opportunity to submit that report and certificate to a recognizing body, and the recognizing body, their purpose is to issue their own private certification mark or a certification mark under a regulatory system for which they participate and have the appropriate credentials from a national regulating body. While this doesn't get us completely to the vision that was portrayed by Elizabeth of one standard, one test, accepted everywhere, what it does do is it facilitates the idea of one standard with consideration of national differences, one set of tests considering those national differences, and one deliverable that can be used and shared across various markets to drive and ensure access to the marketplace for compliance with national requirements. So when you hear this process, you think, well, how big is this and how many people are participating? There are currently 54 member bodies. As you see, there are countries across all of the continents across the globe, and we continually are looking for additional members who are signing on to the IEC's activities as either full member body or as an affiliate country in order to use the IEC standards in their national system with consideration of national differences so that we can bring products to these markets. Don't be confused. Not all countries that you see on this list are fully participating for all areas and activities. Their participation varies based on the use of standards in their marketplace and the needs that they have in their local marketplace. The activities within the system, the activities within the system fall across 22 product categories. In the red box, you see the one most relevant to this discussion, MED, which is the medical devices area of the IECE. But you see that there are many other areas across electrical and electronic sectors that are actively using the system for nearly 30 years to successfully bring their products to market. Another category within this that may be important to you is EMC. So looking again, just to kind of get a feel for what this is, you see that we have, 54 countries, nearly 100 certification bodies, and you see the other data, but the important one being over 120,000 certificates issued annually, more than 1.5 million issued to date to help facilitate access to markets. In particular for medical products, we have half of those members, 28 member countries, are actively participating in the space of medical devices with 51 certification bodies, nearly 300 standards, primarily in the 60601 and 60801 family of 80601 family of standards, resulting in about 3,500 certificates annually. Elizabeth noted what I found very important, and as you see, we do clearly do work together sometimes, because she mentioned the IMDRF being a very significant forum for dialogue amongst national regulatory bodies. This list is a list of all of the countries that currently participate in the CB scheme for medical devices. And you'll see in blue are all the bodies who are represented by a member of the IMDRF. So those people who are actively involved in dialogue are finding value in this process. They're finding value with the engagement, and as a result are actively participating in the system. Only a few countries that are in the medical category in the black text are participating in the IECE, but are not active participants in the IMDRF discussion. And that might provide some value or some consideration for that membership to consider. Finally, I would just note at the bottom in red, we see a list of countries who are members of the IMDRF that have not yet found the importance of participation within the IECE, but are certainly candidate members: Australia, Austria, Brazil, China, and the Russian Federation. As noted, 60601 as an international standard is the foundation of many of the activities of our work. And we have a governance structure that's modeled to allow the confidence that was noted by Gordon in the development of the conformity assessment system. That includes a policy and strategy committee, a committee of testing labs to ensure adequate understanding and repeatability of tests across the international market, and a peer assessment committee to make sure that we can have assessments of our organizations to have trust with them. Further, those governance bodies have developed documents specific to the medical industry to ensure the transportability of results and confidence as we go from market to market. There are some operating documents looking at the unique situation related to risk management as it relates to medical devices. On the right-hand side, you see an example of a decision sheet where, in cases that a standard is not necessarily being applied consistently, or there's a consideration or a question, there's a process for developing a decision sheet to ensure consistent application of requirements. And that process is closed looped, so to say, with the technical committee process. So those materials are handed back to the technical committees, so future editions of the standard can further clarify requirements and ensure consistent application. The deliverables we talked about, the certificate and the test report, this is an example of what those look like. So when receiving a completed project, the certificate actually notes that the test report is only suitable when used with that certificate. That ensures that we've followed the governance and policy processes that make up the foundation of the system. There are some new areas that are important to the industry that are actively being discussed and are beginning their journey in the system. I wanted to put these up there to pay attention to the fact that we have a new service within the last few years on cybersecurity. The area of functional safety is growing. It's a very active community, and we're hoping to move it forward quickly. And then we are starting to move into the area of personnel competence. The reason I display these is these are examples of a perfect time for regulatory interest to participate in the processes. By participating in these processes, we can ensure that these systems, as well as the standards that relate to them, meet your national regulatory needs. And finally, again, I would just say the key here is participate. When in the United States, some time ago, I started my journey in this area of expertise. We had many conformity assessment bodies and a limited number of industry. As we grew the number of industry that were part of the conversation, we much better understood the other side and the other perspective of a key stakeholder group. We were able to adapt requirements to make the services more valuable to them. Similarly, we invite you to the table. We would like to have regulators at the table with us, not only in the standards community on the technical committees, but also in the conformity assessment activities, so that we can hear your side of the story and make sure that we can meet your needs to the best of our ability. We are not here to replace you. We are not here to have a system that stands in place of you. We are here to build a system that meets your trust and confidence needs, so that you can meet your regulatory mandate obligations, but utilize systems such as the IEC to ensure industry and others to meet that objective of getting products to global markets. That ultimately will lead to global optimization. That will lead to better products in the hands of ourselves, our children, our families and friends. And you are the key to making sure those things happen. We are here to support you. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Steve, for that introduction to the IEC EECB scheme. And for any medical technology or device that uses electricity, is electrotechnical, it uses electrons. Certainly the IEC is the place to be for standards, and the CB scheme is the network of the passport, so to speak, of ensuring compliance with devices. So thank you very much for that overview. I'm going to invite all of our session panelists now to turn on their videos, and we'll go through in just a few minutes we have with a couple of questions that have come in. And the first question, we have two questions from Marisol Garcia.
Está como ya.
Standards for the tests of medical devices to ensure that they are safe and effective, considering that despite all being human beings, there are differences in the physiology of people that vary by food, place where they live, genetics, amongst other differences. And the related side question is, has the risk to the health of a person to use a standardized medical device been measured worldwide, considering the genetic variability of people? It's not the same question, but I think the crux of it back. So maybe, Gordon, first I could call on you to address that first aspect of how do you standardize the tests or the standards for the tests of medical devices to ensure that they are safe and effective, considering the differences in people and location and diet, et cetera.
Thank you, Stephen. Thank you for the question as well. The tests that are developed for the demonstration of performance and effectiveness in a series of standards like IEC 6601 are done by a consensus of people who participate from national standards bodies and their mirror committees around the world. So input into those technical performance methodologies come from a global footprint of manufacturers and regulators and others who are concerned and want to contribute to developing robust test processes. I haven't tested a medical device in a long time, but I was not aware of really significant differences in the area of electrical medical devices, at least. One of the focus areas for me was the physiological effects of electric current on the human body, and we didn't find a significant difference in the way that we dealt with products that were going to be used in different markets by different types of people. I think one of the things to be clear is that most of the pass-fail requirements that are built into these standards, where they are built into the standards, are built in with a very high safety factor above what the minimum required for safety are. So, you know, if, for instance, in a given leakage current test, you know, we would do research and find out that a human being could take maybe a couple of milliamps of current, we would likely set the pass-fail threshold probably in order of somewhere between 4 and 10 factors of safety above that threshold level. So I think in general, you'll find for most performance requirements in this sector of devices that those differences are well accommodated.
Okay, thank you, Gordon. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, good. Apologies for my screen. Maybe I can turn now to you, Elizabeth, to also answer and opine in your response to that question on how do you standardize tests on medical devices to ensure that they are safe and effective, considering the differences between human beings varying by food and geography and genetics, et cetera.
Sure. I think Gordon mentioned a little bit of it, but in fact, you know, as the standards are developed in the conformity assessment, first off, as you mentioned, there are stakeholders from around the world and all the different jurisdictions, all the different types of stakeholders in the development process. But also a key element to that process is once it's drafted, it goes out there to an even broader population of people to be able to comment and assess. And one of the key things that when we go to design our products is that is a key input is who are the stakeholders, who are we addressing? And sometimes we do end up putting limitations on the product. So for example, is that if a particular standard really only focused on adult patients, then we would not necessarily automatically just say, oh, this can be used on anybody. That would be part of our criteria in our development. And we might then kick off another standard or kick off some additional clinical testing and things like that. But in general, in the design world, that's part of the design input that we take is that we identify what region, what patient population, what are some of those clinical differences. And we have clinicians that are a part of our input process. We have the patients, we do clinical studies. So there's lots of additional testing, not just the core standards, you know, the 60601 testing that we would partner with, you know, like a UL with. It's really much beyond that we would focus on. And as a part of then the ultimate release into those jurisdictions, that's where many of the regulators do ask some of those questions is what about our patient population difference? You know, what about our, you know, Asia, for example, where there is a very homogeneous, much more homogeneous population. And so that would be part of our design input part of our process to determine what additional clinical parameters we might need to address to ensure that not only are the core standards, and that's part of it is, those are the core standards. That's not the only thing that we do when we're designing our products. We have many, many design inputs. So I know that probably didn't totally answer the question, but it at least touched on it.
Elizabeth, thank you very much. I just got a message from Stephen that his system crashed. So I'm going to be taking over for the additional questions that we have, that we do not, of course, want to miss. So we have one that's for Gordon. What are key success factors that NIST has identified for conformity assessment to become an efficient and effective process for regulators and industry globally?
Thank you. Those are excellent questions. I think there's a couple of them. One is having an understanding that the underlying technical requirements are sufficient. So I think, you know, in the examples that we're talking about voluntary consensus standards. And generally speaking, because of the broad input, and as Elizabeth mentioned, this even broader review, in general, we would consider to be the requirements, both the construction requirements as well as the performance and pass-fail requirements, and many of those standards to be sufficient to bring safe and effective products to the marketplace, assuming that the product's conformed. The second factor really has to do with the evidence of compliance and the confidence that not just the product that was tested in the laboratory, but all of the products that are going to be used in the marketplace, in healthcare facilities, for home healthcare equipment by patients in their own homes, are going to have that same performance as the ones that were tested in the laboratory, and a comprehensive conformity assessment system that looks at initial demonstration of compliance with products in the laboratory, as well as follow-on kinds of activities like surveilling manufacturers' risk and quality management systems or doing other product certification surveillance activities, provides a significant level of confidence, not just in those products that are brought to the laboratories and tested, but in the entire population of products that enters the marketplace. One of the things that regulators do very well, it has connectivity to what's going on with products, especially in the medical device community, once they're being used. So the underlying standard that's typically used for this risk and management system that medical device manufacturers are using globally is ISO 13485, which doesn't just require that you do a good job designing, producing, and selling the product. It also means that you have a reasonable system for aftermarket vigilance. So you can be a part of this identification of potential hazards or issues in the marketplace and be part of the resolution of that, not just for that one item that you found, but on a systemic level, so you can have a corrective action for all of the products that manufacturers are responsible for. This cooperation in these systems of recalls and fixes of products in the marketplace between the regulators and the manufacturing community makes the medical device area one of the safest there is.
Thank you very much, Gordon. The next question is addressed by Wilson. It's posted by Wilson Bonato to Stephen Margis. Don't you think that peer evaluation can create a conflict of interest because an NCB is evaluating another NCB, its competition?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And I actually would say it's quite the opposite. when we think about the international system, the IECEE, the premise of its success is the ability for one body to accept and receive the reports and work of another for the purpose of issuing their own mark. Each organization that's participating, my organization UL amongst many others, at the end of the day has a situation where they will be issuing their own certification mark, of which they have their own integrity and confidence criteria to consider. So I actually think that while the question would seem to think there might be a conflict of interest, I think this is a more difficult bar to pass in that the organizations that are assessing are the experts, and those experts have a innate interest in making sure they have that confidence because they will be the ones that will receive that work. Thank you.
Yep, thank you very much. So, Stephen, we have you back.
Yes, apologies for that little IT difficulty. So I know we're out of time for this panel session, but I did just want to highlight a couple things as we close it out before the break. First, thanks to this panel of experts on the subject, and it really was meant to be a sampler menu. It was not meant to be the full top to bottom on everything conformity assessment. We would probably need multiple webinar series to do that. But I think we made good progress towards covering the basics of conformity assessment and as it pertains to the functions of the medical and industry. And also the other item I wanted to highlight is that similar to regulatory development or standards, there's a similarity with conformity assessment, and that's if you go into a restaurant and nobody is there, there's a problem. There's something that the world knows that you don't. And if you're starting from scratch, that should give you pause, because there are on the standard side hundreds of standards that are used for medical device regulatory function and development, production, and testing and quality. And similarly for conformity assessment, there are probably an infinite number of ways to design a conformity assessment system, but that is not to say that there aren't certain parameters that apply to it from either the World Trade Organization or just given the global networks that are there regarding first party, second party, third party, accreditation, testing, certification, inspection, and schemes similar to the IECEE scheme. So with that, I wish to really thank again all of our panelists, and we close out this session. Back to you, Sandra.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stephen. And really, thank you very much for our panelists. We have still a couple of questions in our Q&A. Martin, thank you very much. I'm seeing that you are typing an answer. And for the one for Ruth, we're going to be replying back to you, and we're going to be sharing the response via email after we are done with the panel. Thank you very much. And we were supposed to have like a 5-minute break, but if it is okay with everybody, I'd appreciate if we just move directly to our next session so we can start just in time for that, and also as a respect to our panelists in the next session. So with that, again, thank you very much for our panelists. And now I am really very glad to introduce Stacy Sullivan. Dr. Stacy Sullivan is a senior standards advisor with the FDA's Standards and Conformity Assessment Program, SCAP, in the Center for Devices and Radiological Health. In that role, she leads experts across the center as part of SCAP's mission to contribute to the development of high-quality, regulatory-ready standards. She also conceptualized and launched the center's first materials engineering interest group and is directing the future revision of the ASTM F2028 standard. Before joining SCAP, Dr. Sullivan served in the Office of Science and Engineering Laboratories as a research engineer, conducting studies in corrosion, infrared thermometry, and biomechanics. Before coming to the FDA, Dr. Sullivan worked in research and development for a major medical device manufacturer. She earned a PhD in mechanical engineering from University of Maryland, where her research focused on biomaterials and biomechanics. Stacy, thank you very much for your support, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Sandra. I'm excited to be here today for the panel discussion on the utilization of international standards and conformity assessment, where we'll hear from medical device regulatory authority representatives from Colombia and Mexico. Today, we have with us Ms. Celini Marin Cortez from the Colombia Ministry of Health and Social Protection, Ms. Eleonora Solis Cañas from INVIMA, the Colombian National Food and Drug Surveillance Institute, Mr. Rafael Hernandez Medina from the Mexican United States Pharmacopoeia, and Janet Bolaños Valerio from the Sanitary Authorization Commission at COFEPRIS, Mexico's Federal Commission for the Protection Against Sanitary Risks. Thank you all for being here. To those joining us, please remember that you can enter your questions in the Q&A at any time during the presentations, and we will go through them at the end of each of the panelists. Well, at the end of all panelists, sorry. I will now ask that if our panelists are here, see if you have your video on, to please turn them off, with the exception of Ms. Celini Marin Cortez. Ms. Marin is a biomedical engineer in hospital engineering and a technician in radiological protection for the Argentina Nuclear Regulatory Authority. She has 18 years of experience in the public and private sector and has been a coordinator of the Ionizing Radiations Group and has developed medical device guidance documents. Ms. Marin is currently a contractor at the Directorate of Drugs and Health Technologies at the Ministry of Health and Social Protection, and is also a college professor. With that, it is my pleasure to hand it over to Ms. Marin.
Bueno, buenos días a todos. Muchas gracias por
Hello, everybody. Thank you for the kind invite. I thank the Inter-American Commission for Regulatory Convergence, FDA, and NBIM. Thank you very much for the invitation to be here today and to speak about the experience of Colombia regarding the use of voluntary consensus standards for conformity assessment. And we thank all of the panelists for all of the information they have shared so far, because as a country, we deeply care about this matter. Thank you. I'll start sharing my presentation now. Very good. So this is going to be a presentation in which I'll speak about conformity assessment in Colombia. Our content will be part of quality infrastructure, the entities of the health sector, the regulatory framework and horizon for medical devices in Colombia. Let us start with the quality infrastructure in Colombia. It is important to say that in Colombia, we have a national subsystem for quality matters, and this subsystem is called SICAL. As a country, we adopted this system so as to increase competitiveness of producers and to guarantee that consumers will be safe, and that in our country, there'll be high quality standards for all products. Our SICAL system is made up basically by the standardization processes. Andres, during the previous meeting, spoke about all of the technical standards currently applicable in Colombia. In coordination with other agencies, they have brought many technical standards to our country. We also have the National Metrology Institute, which basically is in charge of all of the studies within our country to do all the tests. And the National Accreditation Organization, ONAC, and the role they play is that they help us with the surveillance, the inspection, the tests, and they come up with a list of certified companies. And within the general framework and within our general context, we have a national regulation, Decree 1595 from 2015 by the Ministry of Trade. And so what they do is that they regulate all of our national quality subsystem. So right now, what we have in our country is the national subsystem that has just been installed, and it's been working for us since the year 2015. So what is it that we have? We have a accreditation system of independent declaration of conformity, so as for somebody to carry out an assessment. We also have mutually recognition agreements, internationally speaking, so as to be able to facilitate commercial operations between our market with others. And so basically, through the accreditation organization, ONAC, since we have a mutual recognition system, we have facilitated checks for all products that already have a certificate from other countries. This has facilitated our transactions greatly nationally. The international, or rather the national accreditation entity in Colombia is a third-party organization that does a declaration and can prove the competency by verifying the documents or all of things that are presented by international companies. And this goes hand in hand with all of the international agreements that we are currently endorsing. Now, let us speak about the health sector. How is our health sector organized from the perspective of the Ministry of Health? The Ministry of Health, it's a public agency that's centralized. Basically, it is the head of the health sector. It's the one that is in charge of assessing and guiding the national health and social security systems in our country through the creation of policies, plans, programs, and the coordination of different sectors with all of the stakeholders in the arena so as to improve the quality, the timely appearance of products, and to provide sustainability to our system. Our purpose is also to increase all of the satisfaction levels of our patients, the relatives, the communities, all throughout the land. We have another unit, which is a decentralized body, but it's also a governmental agency, but it's an independent, its independence of its budgetary matters. INVIMA, it's the name of it, the sanitary agency. INVIMA is the entity that is in charge of applying the regulation that is issued by us as the ministry. So what we do is that we issue the standards, and on the one hand, we do the regulation, and on the other one, we have this sanitary agency that does the surveillance of our regulations, of all of the products. Something about the regulatory framework. There are different acts, laws. One of the oldest one is one from 1990, the 1438 from 2011, which is the most current one, and 1751. Those different laws have allowed us to have a regulatory development of certain products. I could perhaps speak of two examples. All of the regulatory framework of medical devices, Decree 4725 of 2005, and Decree 3770 of 2007, which is the regulatory framework in everything regarding diagnosis. There's something particular about Colombia. We understand that worldwide level that reagents are within medical devices, but here we had two different decrees to guide them, and both of them cover all of the aspects in terms of safety, quality of those reactives, and they establish different requirements that have allowed us to have medical devices that are safe nationally, as well as the ones that we import. That is why we also have some resolutions that stem from this decree. One of them is Resolution 4018, which basically regulates everything regarding to the National Techno-Surveillance Program. Those are post-market, post-sale systems, and Resolution 4002, which basically establishes all of the requirements for capability and housing and adjustment of medical devices. This standard only applies for medical device importers. Right now, we don't have best producing practices for national producers, but we are undergoing a process to develop that type of regulation. And something about the semantic regularization, Resolution 2535, which is also included within our projects. And in the near future, we hope we'll be able to issue this part of the regulation. And on the other hand, we also have Decree 3770, which is the regulatory framework of in vitro reactive agents, as well Resolution 132, which basically also regulates everything regarding certificates for warehousing for the importers of diagnosis reactive purchase. So those are the two regulations that are issued by the ministry. And let me clarify once again that INVIMA is our technical area, and they are the ones who make certain that we can apply the regulations for our producers, for the regulators, and for post-sale surveillance. We work hand in hand with the local authorities and the general public for this purpose. Now, something else that is important is our regulatory horizon for medical devices. The current decrees, well, they were produced in 2005 and 2004. They are not so recent. And right now, we are applying the whole regulatory governance cycle within our regulations. And through this, we're able to have we will be able to have a regulatory framework that is now updated, and we will be able to have the necessary tools so that the level of the design and the regulation are much more focused to our reality, to the international standards, to having a citizen participation along with other actors, and with this to be able to have a regulation that is pretty much focused on what is now at the level of the international arena. But that's a huge challenge for us, of course. How do we include conformity assessment in our regulation within the subsystem? How do we make it to be a complement to the things that we already have developed as a regulatory agency? That is the question, that is the challenge. So how are we going to face it? Right now, we're receiving support. We are working with projects that are helping us to work with the standard. We are developing the National Medical Devices Policy, in which medical devices will be included, all of the diagnosis, the in vitro diagnosis reactives. We will also be working with the ex-post assessment of decrees 847/2045 and 3770, including conformity assessment. And in this project, we are receiving the support of regulatory convergence. We have a very important support for this, and we hope that with this special project, we will be able to launch it as quickly as possible. And we also have a project for good manufacturing practices, for which we're also receiving support from the convergency and semantic standardization experts. The challenges are varying. It's a lot of work. The team is made up by people from different disciplines. Right now, we are working closely hand in hand with INVIMA with this. And with this, we will be able to, once again, have standards that are updated and that can help us have something that is much more standardized, harmonized. To ensure the safety, the quality. So I think we're going in the right direction. And well, thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much for your presentation, Selene. It's very interesting to see, that window into your regulatory structure and partnerships. If you have any questions for Selene, please, I encourage you to go ahead and enter them in the chat, and we will pick those up at the end of our presentations. Our next presenter, if you would please turn on your video, is Eleonora Solis Cañas. Ms. Solis is a lawyer specializing in new technologies law. She's also a specialist on intellectual property law and has a master's in information technologies and communications law with 14 years of experience in health and regulatory topics. Ms. Solis has held several positions at INVIMA. She has served as a lawyer with the Deputy Directorate of Sanitary Registration for Drugs, Dietary Supplements, Homeopathic Products, and Medical Devices. She was also a specialized professional at the Directorate of Medical Devices and Other Technologies, and the Office of Legal Advisory in the Legal Representation Group, as well as the Institutional Legal Support Group. Currently, Ms. Solis is the coordinator of the Sanitary Registration Group at the Directorate of Medical Devices and Other Technologies. With that, it is my pleasure to hand it over to Ms. Solis. Thank you.
Sí, muy buenas tardes.
Thank you. Good afternoon. How's everyone doing? It's a great honor to be in this panel and to be able to speak about conformity assessment. What is it that we look into in our regulation of medical devices in Colombia? I am going to ask you to bear with me while I'll start sharing my presentation.
Eleonora, si tienes alguna complicación técnica para compartir, con todo gusto lo podemos hacer acá, desde acá.
Si quieres, sí, porque ahora no la veo. ¿Me podrían ayudar, por favor?
Seguro que sí. Dame nada más un
Just
segundo.
1 second. We're having some technical difficulties, but just 1 second, please.
Es esta. Acá, mira.
Ok. Ya la ven, me parece, ¿verdad? ¿Me pueden indicar si ven mi pantalla con la presentación?
Sí, ya se ve la pantalla con la presentación, gracias.
Excelente. Tú me indicas si yo la voy manejando.
Listo, entonces muchísimas gracias nuevamente. Ahora les voy a hablar un
So
poco
once again, thank you very much. I'm going to talk about conformity assessment in the regulation of medical devices and international standards. So here to talk about the 3 pillars of INVIMA, which is transparency, efficiency, and health status, based on the digital transformation, human resources, processes, and technology, always advocating for human health, public health. So this is the subject matters I'm going to talk about. I'm going to talk about the structure and the functions, regulatory framework for medical devices and in vitro diagnosis reagents, the legal and technical requirements for the issuance of the health registry and or the marketing permit. So here, INVIMA is a national government institute for scientific and technological purposes, and it's part of the health system. As Ms. Soleini already said, we execute the standards that are issued by the Ministry of Health and Social Protection. So here we have the organizational structure at INVIMA. We have a general director or CEO who is Dr. Julio Cesar Aldama. Then we have national strategic offices. And in those offices, we have the medical devices and other technologies area with Lucia Ayala heading that area as the director. So here to talk about what we're doing, well, we go from innovation, as we have it here, to manufacturing and imports. Then we grant the authorizations, the marketing authorizations, and we're also doing the surveillance of adverse events after the marketing and the sale of the same. So it's pre and post market. Our competitors' products are standard medical devices, those that are personalized, tissue banks, the in vitro diagnosis reagents, and the units of reproductive biomedicine. So for Colombia, the regulatory framework for medical devices is based on Decree 4725 of 2005, where they regulate the whole regime of health registries for marketing permits and health-related surveillance of medical devices for human use. These are the standards we base our conformity assessment on. As Ms. Soleini mentioned, in Colombia, we have two different regulatory frameworks for one for medical devices and the other one for in vitro diagnosis reagents. That is Decree 3770, dated from 2004, that stipulates all the regulations for health registries and health surveillance of in vitro diagnosis reagents for examinations in human specimens. So I am now going to talk about this assessment, the conformity assessment, and what we assess. So in our quality management system, in the national system, we have the good manufacturing practices. The equivalent are the technical health conditions for our local manufacturers. That is how they are called here, because we currently do not have these good manufacturing practices. We do have the technical health conditions stipulated. We also have a certificate in the capacity for storage and packaging for those facilities that import and work on medical devices. For foreign manufacturers, we accept the good manufacturing practices standards that are issued from the country of origin. So the ISO 13485, the 14971, and additionally, they need to be certified in storage and conditioning capabilities, and all the importers need to be certified in that, those that are importing and storing medical devices. Now, as part of this conformity assessment, we have legal requirements for medical devices and for in vitro diagnosis reagents. So in this legal assessment, we are verifying who is the legal person or the individual that is requesting the registry or the registry is at, the power that they have, the power they have to do that procedure. If it's a lawyer, they need the proof that they are the legal representatives of the importers and the exporters, a free sale certificate for imported products, and the authorization of the manufacturer, who is the owner of the product, given to the importer so that they can import and market their product in Colombia's national territory. And if necessary, they could also be the head of the health registry. Now, as part of the conformity assessment, we have some technical requirements, and these technical requirements include a technical assessment where we also check the quality management system. As I said before, our local system has the necessary health conditions, which is what is equivalent to the good manufacturing practices, but we call it differently. And they also need the certificate for storage and conditioning capacities for those areas that are importing and are storing medical devices. We also have the description of the medical device, the technical studies, and all the analytical proof, where we do the verification and validation of the design. We see the finished product analysis certificate, the sterilization method, useful life, the elimination method or final disposal method, biocompatibility studies, electrical security, risk analysis, the list of applicable standards. These are international standards for the design and manufacturing of that medical device. These are the standards the manufacturer is telling us they used for the manufacturing of that specific device, so that they can guarantee the safety and the functioning of all the devices. Clinical studies, and all of these requirements are based on a risk level and a demandability level. So depending on the risk of the medical device, the requirements will be demanded based on this risk level. When we talk about in vitro diagnosis reagents, well, here, as part of the technical assessment that we do, we also include some technical requirements. So we have, with the principle of the test, the classification of that reagent. These are also classified in different categories. We have category 1, 2, 3, and we have also the specifications of finished product quality that include sensitivity, specificity, reproducibility, precision, stability of the reagents at different temperatures and times, you know, the labels, the packaging, the good manufacturing practices certificate from the origin country, the health quality certificate from the country of origin. This could be optional if they do not have the good manufacturing practices. Also, we need the certificate for conditioning and storage conditions, which is known as the CCAA for imported product. This is our local quality management system. And we need a technical approval concept for the product on the from the specialized room for medical devices and in vitro diagnosis reagents for products of category 3, whose certificate for free sale is not coming from a country of reference. Here, when I talk about the specialized area, INVIMA has the reviewer commission that is one of the advisory committee that covers all of these technical and scientific topics, and is formed by different specialists in these type of complex topics. And all of this is to assure the safety and the functioning, and to guarantee the safety and the functioning of that medical device as well as its quality. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ms. Solis. It's great to hear how standards are being leveraged as part of your performance and evaluation. So now we're going to move to Mexico, and we'll hear from Rafael Hernandez Medina. Mr. Hernandez is the Deputy Director of Edition and Publications for the Mexican United States Pharmacopoeia. He is a chemist, pharmacist biologist by the National Autonomous University of Mexico, and a master on industrial management from UNAM's School of Chemistry. Prior to his current role as deputy director, Mr. Hernandez was the technical manager at Pharmacopoeia. He has been a part of COFIPRIS's subcommittee for medical product standardization since 1999, where he has participated in the drafting and revision of Mexican official standards for drugs and medical devices. At the Pharmacopoeia, he has coordinated the additives and critical systems committees and has led projects such as Herbal Products Pharmacopoeia and the Medical Devices Supplement. He has also been responsible for the publication and the history and pharmaceutical regulation chapters, among others. As part of COFIPRIS, he has been a guest speaker at several trainings on health regulation and other topics at universities, industry associations, and chambers for both drugs and medical devices. It is my pleasure to have Mr. Hernandez speak. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you this morning. And so I want to thank the organizers. I want to share my screen. Hopefully you can see it. Just 1 second, please.
Muy bien, muchas gracias.
Great.
Bueno, pues en los siguientes minutos comentaré.
So in the minutes to come, we will talk about how we can add international standards in a specialized publication of Mexico's Pharmacopoeia that's specific for medical devices. So first I want to give you like a little bit of background. Regarding the health subject matter, the general health area has to have health control for the process, use, maintenance, import, export, as well as final disposal of everything that we call medical devices. The medical devices concept in Mexico includes not only what literally could be the medical equipment in its different languages, but also includes diagnosis reagents as products like biopharmaceuticals that in Mexico are known as diagnosis agents. So the question is, how do we do this health control of all of those inputs used for health, specifically of medical devices? Our general health law says that this control is going to be done via the official Mexican standards and other standards, applicable standards. So the equivalent of the norms in Mexico are the technical regulations. And when we have this other term that talks about other applicable provisions, the law itself specifies that in Article 195, that the Pharmacopoeia of Mexico is going to regulate drugs and other inputs used for health purposes, including medical devices. So we have different standard documents that allows us to have this control of medical devices. By definition, the Pharmacopoeia establishes the identifications and the identity of all of these inputs used for health, as well as the test methods to prove its efficiency. So the profile of the different pharmacopoeias worldwide is normally used to regulate only drugs. And there's not many of these pharmacopoeias worldwide that includes medical devices. Those that are included worldwide are quite specific, like talking about sutures or contrast mediums, etc. And so one of the paradigms that we have, or a difference that we have in our own pharmacopoeia here in Mexico, is that we create a specific publication for medical devices. The Mexican Pharmacopoeia dates from 1946 by the Mexican Academy of Pharmaceuticals in Mexico. And then it has a second stage that was also done by the Pharmaceutical Society in Mexico that had several versions. And then in 1990, it became an official document. And so now the responsibilities of the Mexican government to update that. But what I wanted to say is that Mexico Devices and the Mexican Pharmacopeia, even in these publications of the last century or the previous one, mention some quality specifications for devices like cotton, gauzes, contrast, and sutures. In 2006, the Mexican Congress determined that it was necessary to modify the general health law so that medical devices could be regulated via the Pharmacopeia by a specific supplement or supplement on medical devices. This one has its first version in 2006. The second version was issued in 2011, then 2014, our third issue. And the current version that we're using is in 2017 one, but by the end of this year, in December of 2022, we will have now the fifth edition for medical devices known as Medical Devices Supplement 5.0. We also have annual articles that allows us to update the content also regarding medical devices, not only the drugs, but we have this for medical devices also. What does this mean, having the supplement for medical devices? Well, first of all, it has the same hierarchical and legal level as an official Mexican standard or a NOM, or a technical standard. It's a document that is that's constantly being updated because of the nature of its content, and it needs to be reviewed permanently because of that. In the surveillance or the compliance of it, or the surveillance of its compliance is done by the Ministry of Health through the regulatory agency of the Ministry of Health known as COFEPRIS. And one of the characteristics that this supplement for medical devices has is that it can establish specific information for a device or used by families. For example, the one that has to do with sutures is one of the most complete ones that the Pharmacopeia has, the Mexican Pharmacopeia has, because it includes a vast array of different sutures. And it also has general methods for analysis that can even be used when we don't have a specific modality, and that could make a huge difference. Now, the content of this supplement for medical devices includes a chapter with an overview, general points of view, it's like the instruction guideline on how to interpret and read the supplement. Then we have the chapter for solutions and reagents, especially for the preparation of the different solutions that will be used in the chemical analytical determinations. And then we have another section for general analysis methods that is divided in two. The first one are the general analysis methods that are commonly used between all medical devices and all drugs. And the second part of this chapter in general methods includes specific methods that are only for medical devices. Then we have 224 product data sheets of the different categories, medical equipment, curation material, etc. And then we have the biopharmaceutical chapter. And lastly, we have a section of appendixes that has information that is supplementary or that is going to help us add information to the case studies that we have for each one of the products or the monographs that we have for the products. And so in this case, we have a series of content for it. And what I wanted to mention, and this is something that we all should reflect on during this interaction, is that yes, actually, one of the principles that the development of the Mexican Pharmacopeia has in its content is that one of the general principles, according to the standard official Mexican standard, official standard 001 SSA 1 2020 published last year, says that it has to be ruled by a general principle of harmonization, which means that all the analysis methods and all the specifications stipulated in the Mexican Pharmacopeia have to agree with internationally agreed criteria. So this is a principle that the Pharmacopeia has, but this standard that also explains the procedure for the update, the addition and the diffusion of the Pharmacopeia and its supplements, including that of the medical devices, says that when we issue This Mexican Pharmacopeia, it says that for harmonization and convergence, the Mexican Pharmacopeia could base it in pharmacopeias of other countries whose procedures, analysis procedures are done based on the specifications of specialized organizations or scientific bibliography recognized internationally. So we are very clear that one of the main principles to set up all of these pharmacopoeias of medical devices has to include and promote this harmonization and convergence. For that, and because standard 001 stipulates it, we get support from other pharmacopoeias with which we have a huge interaction level. For example, the conversion of the pharmacopoeia of the United States, and with them we have an agreement signed that has its main backgrounds of 2018, but before this, we had another memo of understanding in 1999, and actually the actual relationship that we had began all the way back in 1988. So this MOU includes, among other things, that the scope to work both pharmacopoeias together would include medical devices. And so, not many pharmacopoeias, including that of the United States, have these data sheets for specific products. There are some of them, and we can see them here. We have the contrast media that we could see is very similar to the medical devices, formulated medical devices, similar to the medications. And so that is why it's common to find them in other pharmacopoeias. And so we need to do harmonization work that is very closely related one to the other one. Another point where we do have interaction is in the analysis methods. So the 39 methods that you can see here in the first two charts are methods that are used for both drug control as well as for medical devices. And there's a lot of harmonization work being done between both pharmacopoeias to this regard. I was also saying that after the general methods that are being used for medical devices and for drugs, we also have a specialized block, which are that are the analysis blocks for medical devices. Right now we have 26 of those, and those normally do not have an equivalent in other pharmacopoeias. Now, regarding other pharmacopoeias that we use as a reference, well, it's also necessary to analyze the European Pharmacopoeia. Since 2012, the Mexican Pharmacopoeia was accepted as an observer member of the European Pharmacopoeia. And one of the advantages is that we can work together on the drafts that the European community, the European Union, have been able to develop and publish in their own pharmacopoeia. Right there, we have an interesting field of work, because in the Mexican Pharmacopoeia, we have the radiopharmaceutical projects that in Mexico are the radiopharma drugs that are part of the diagnosis agents here. And at least we have 44 data sheets of them that have certain similarity with the European Pharmacopoeia ones. And the most relevant raw material for the construction of the pharmacopoeia for medical devices is, without any doubt, the ISO standards. We base it on that. And in each one of the specific data sheets that we have per product, we have an ISO equivalent, which is the one we use to follow or to try to comply with. And sometimes we even get information that is not specific for one device and that might not be present in a specific data sheet, but that is considered because it is relevant and is included as part of the appendixes. In that case, for example, the ISO 14971 standard for risk management of medical devices has its equivalent in Appendix 5 of the supplement for medical devices in the pharmacopoeia. This is a need because my colleague Jenny Bolaños is going to talk about this when they talk about the good manufacturing standards that we have, and they need to go back to see the risk management for medical devices that is in that appendix. And so that standard allows the pharmacopoeia to see and provide all the support that is necessary for good manufacturing practices. So this is kind of the relationship and the things that we need to do, and that at some point the Mexican Pharmacopoeia had to develop this. There are other areas where the ISO standards are also relevant. Everything that has to do with biocompatibility, for example, of the series 10993 are things that we've been working on in these last months so that we could have a reference framework for all of these type of tests. And some of the new appendixes or annexes that are being developed to add or give better context of the quality of medical devices in the Pharmacopoeia includes the topic of sterilization that has to do with ISO 11138, or the part of stability that is not an ISO standard, it's more as an ASTM standard. And it's another one of the references that we use for the development of our own standards. The process that NOM 001 establishes for building this is that at the beginning of the year, we have to stipulate a yearly work plan together with the committee, and then the committee of experts develops a draft. That's where we use the international standards so that we can have like a first draft of the Pharmacopoeia document that will then go to a public consultation process with the users. So for 2 months, all private individuals can review it and issue their comments. After we receive those comments, we collect them and we provide them to the Medical Devices Committee so that they can see the observations, do the necessary adjustments, and then we have a final version. That final version is the one that is integrated to that is published. COFEPRIS, through its legal area, would do everything possible for this to be published in the official Gazette, because it's a document known as a sales notification of a specific device, and that is what's going to make the Pharmacopoeia official, and it also states when it will begin its enforcement. Just to wrap this up, I was also mentioning that right now we are in the first period for user consultation of this year. This is on the website, and right there you can consult the content that we currently have. And right now we have at least 2 data sheets of general methods for analysis of medical devices that corresponds to biocompatibility tests. So there you can click this and you can see a document like this one where you can see the whole proposal of the text. And so we are here to receive any comments, and we're ready to receive them all the way to the end of this month, because that's when our first period ends. As a conclusion, we can tell you that in order to establish the specifications, quality specifications of medical devices and its proving methods that will be included in the supplement for medical devices of the Mexican Pharmacopoeia, we require harmonization with other pharmacopoeias. As you might have seen, not all pharmacopoeias have enough information regarding medical devices. And so in that case, our main reference are the ISO standards, but we can actually get closer or use as a reference other documents that have been created by other entities like the ASTM, among others. So that is all my participation, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Hernandez. It's great to hear about the development and incorporation of the standards. The landscape is always changing, and how we approach different challenges is always evolving. We have to stay, connected by taking those comments. It's a way we can incorporate everybody's perspectives. Next, we have Yanette Bolanos Valerio. She is a pharmaceutical industrial chemist by the National School of Biological Scientists at the National Polytechnical Institute. Since 2005, she has been a specialized reviewer at the Deputy Directorate of Sanitary Licensing of the Sanitary Authorization Commission at COFEPRIS. She has been a part of the subcommittee of medical products for the modification of the Mexican official standards on medical devices, good manufacturing practices, as well as other good manufacturing practices standards, such as pharmaceutical products and APIs, and the experts committee of critical systems of the Mexican pharmacopoeia. Ms. Bolaños has participated as a speaker in several forums on good manufacturing practices. She is a part of the International Agency of Atomic Energy, and she has supported the development of a program to establish a long-term management plan to strengthen the capacity to use radioisotopes for diagnoses and therapeutic uses. Ms. Bolaños has participated at the Regulatory Affairs Professional Society on topics such as medical devices, regulatory convergence, as well as pharmaceutical inspections cooperation schemes. With that, it's my pleasure to hand it over to Ms. Bolaños. Thank you.
Gracias a usted. Buenas tardes a todos.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for having invited me. I will start sharing my screen. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yes, we can see it. But if you could expand it, that would be better. Is this better? It's taking its sweet time because we can only see a blank screen now. Still not working. Why don't you try again or go back to the previous view? Or perhaps we could share the screen from where we are here. I'll try it once again. And if it's not working, this, please do help me.
¿Ya se ve?
Can you see it?
Como modo de presentador, no de
Yes,
presentación.
but
Entonces, si cambias de pantalla, seguro.
you still, if you share once again, I think we'll be able to see it now because it did change, but we need one more step.
Si quieres, yo ya la tengo lista, comparto mi pantalla, Janet.
I can help you with my screen. I have it ready now.
¿Sí?
Yes, please,
Perfecto.
because
¿Me dicen si la ven?
I cannot make it work. Nope, no worries. It's fine. Okay, so I would like to speak about how COFEPRIS has worked in incorporating ISO 13485 and Standard 241. Standard 241, which is one of good manufacturing practices in our national territory. It is applicable to medical device producers, and therefore we'll speak about how this work is being done to achieve the standardization. Help me with the next one, please. There are two objectives for me today. One is to explain the assessment that we carry out using the current Mexican standard 2012 versus the medical device quality management system established by ISO 13485-2016. And to give you some background, we would also like to explore how this is being standardized or incorporated. How are we adopting international standards in our Mexican one? As you know, COFEPRIS works according to an continuous improvement policy. We've done that for many years. Our main objective is to achieve standardization. Rafael spoke about how it is a policy for us to achieve standardization of the requirements with international standards. So given that, as you might know, ISO 13485 changed in 2016. So COFEPRIS decided to carry out an assessment of the international standard, to make a review of it to detect where the needs of changes emerged in terms of good manufacturing practices of medical devices. That's the first thing. But then, to give you some other background, quality infrastructure law that is applicable in Mexico, it is established that Mexican standards should be assessed and reviewed and verified, but at least every 5 years, so as to be able to detect and update standardization needs or whatever changes are required. So according to those two facts, that's when we decided to start a process to make a comparative analysis between both standards. During the first part of my presentation, I'll speak about what we found when we did the comparison and contrast exercise of the two standards I mentioned. And the second part of the presentation, I'll speak about how we approached those gaps or those fields of opportunity that we detected. And we will speak about how we carried out the necessary changes to consider the requirements that ISO 13485-2016 had already set forward and that were missing in the official Mexican standard of good manufacturing practices of medical devices. So according to that, let's go on to the next slide. What is it that we found when we did the compare and contrast exercise? As regulators, we did a gap analysis between two standards. We found, to begin with, that there were standardized requirements. Both standards have general fields as field of application, definition, etc., that are considered by standard 241. Next slide, please. But then we found one by one that there were gaps. There are three types of gaps. One of them, which is not significant, it could also be a partial gap, or it could be something that is significant, a significant gap. So those were the three categories. In this case, we found that in terms of ISO 13485.4, in terms of quality systems, there's a gap, not because the 241 doesn't establish the need of having a quality management system, or rather there was a gap because in 241, since this was a good manufacturing practice guideline, the requirements were more specific regarding the elaboration principles. Now, in terms of design and construction of the facilities, very close to 1345.6, there was a significant gap there. And this gap was not because there was an absence of requirement in the Mexican standard, but rather because in the Mexican official standard, since it's one of good manufacturing practices, it established requirements according to the type of product or type of process that was carried out by the producer. For instance, for those producers of aseptic processes, a type of area is necessary. And this is what we included in the Mexican standard of good practices. Next one, please. Now, in terms of out-of-spec products or non-conforming products, we found that both standards are actually requiring the same things. In terms of complaint management or claims, we are completely aligned to ISO 13485. However, in the official Mexican standard, point 13, there's also a point for returns. That is why this was classified as a partial gap. It's not that anything was missing, but on the contrary. Next one, validations. Once again, we see that ISO 13485 establishes in a very general way that this requirement should exist, but in the Mexican standard in 241, specific requirements are needed for the validation of aseptic or sterile processes, as well as sterilization by terminal methods. And this is where we also include what Rafael mentioned by saying that Pharmacopedia provides a technical support for this type of validations, like sterilization in this case. That is why this was considered to be a partial gap. Next one, please. In the same clause, we see that standard 241, there are 3 requirements for the validation of production processes, like validation of equipment, and more specifically, it refers to 4 sequential stages certifications. So it's not that the Mexican standard is not requiring validation, but rather there are additional requirements since this is a good manufacturing practices guideline. Change controls. Here, there was a significant gap. And it is not, once again, because there's anything missing from the Mexican standard, but rather because in ISO 13485, there is no requirement as this to keep a track of changes. However, in good manufacturing practices, it is a requirement. That is why this was considered a significant gap, but it doesn't affect the change process. Next one. Now, speaking about deviations and layers, they are in full agreement with what is established by ISO 13485, with the exception that 241 speaks of a committee for the evaluation and the final opinion. So this requirement is standardized. Next one, please. Now, in terms of internal audits, according to ISO 13485, in the Mexican official standard, we have a point of technical audits in which, additional to the internal audits, we also consider external audits, such as, for instance, to vendors, for people who render services or who sell inputs. And that is why this was considered to be a partial gap without it affecting the need of requirements. Next one. So as to conclude, what is it that we found when we carried out the gap analysis in the beginning of 2017? What we found is that there were certain differences, 2 significant gaps, 6 partial gaps, and 1 non-significant gap. However, we made a decision of approaching all of the gaps that were detected as missing requirements, which I will explain the second part of my presentation. This is how we came up with a proposal to change standard 241, which in 2017 we presented to request the incorporation in the yearly standardization program of that year. So that's when a subcommittee of health inputs was created to assess the need to change the standard. People from the industry were represented, as well as from the academia, health institutes, and obviously the regulators. How were those missing requirements approached? How did we handle the missing gaps? I'll explain that next. Next slide, please. So here we have, once again, a comparative table between ISO 13485-2016 versus the changes that are now part of what's been published by the official Gazette, and I'll refer to them as the standard 241-2021. Here, there's a clause for quality management in point 6. And so basically the requirements are completely now standardized for auditing purposes. We consider external audits as well as part of this quality management system. Next slide, please. And then we have a part in which the type of documentation that require 6.5 of the Mexican standard. Here we find that the standard does ask for specific type of documents that are required and how long they should be kept. for medical device producers, but this is not a requirement that is missing. It's an additional requirement due to our national regulatory framework. Next one. In terms of the dossiers of medical devices, we are basically standardized, but there's a section for the dossier in which the standard, since was originated by good manufacturing practices, it requires certain authors for the purchase, for the conditioning, for the maintenance that are specific of good production practices. Then about the management of purchases, this is one that has been completely standardized and included because standard 2241 2012, this was not considered. So we worked on the standardization according to standard 13485 to be completely aligned and in compliance. Next one. Purchasing information and input verification, those points were incorporated so as to be in agreement with standard, the ISO standard. Measurement, analysis, monitoring, this is also another part that was incorporated to standard 241 so as to achieve alignment with ISO 13485. Auditings, I've already explained this. In the case of the Mexican standard, we do consider external auditors. Next one. The monitoring and the measurement of systems and products, non-conformity, product control or rework, those points are now completely aligned. And in the case of the first two, those are new things incorporated to the standard. The other two have already been included before in the 2012 version. Data analysis, this is new for standard 241. Once again, to be in agreement with the ISO standard. In terms of CAPA, same requirements. Obviously, standard 241, there is a more detailed breakdown of the CAPA system. Next one. The design and development, all of the points, the review, the design, the inputs, everything, this is all completely new in the 241 standard as part of our efforts to be aligned to ISO. This is the second part of the changes of design and development, validation, transfer, and change control, and design and development dossiers that are new things that were incorporated. And now in terms of staff, we have basically the same requirements. The only thing that is different now is that there are some requirements of specific things that are included in the Mexican regulatory framework, but in essence, it's all about compliance with ISO 13485. Facilities and equipment, what we had said, we keep a significant gap, and it's not because anything is missing from the requirement, but because since this was a standard that came from good manufacturing practices, we consider some other type of particular elements. Next one. Validation and quality management system. The validation of sterile processes, the validation of sterilization, and also critical systems assessment. This is all included in this part. The validation of sterile processes, as you see here, we are now completely aligned to what is established by ISO 13485. However, aside from that, we also make reference to some other clauses from the US, the Mexican pharmacopoeia guidelines. And in terms of good manufacturing and warehousing practices, we're fully in agreement with ISO. Next one. So to conclude this second part of the presentation, now if you compare ISO 13485 versus the Mexican standard 241/2021, as you can see, now there was one significant gap that we had mentioned in terms of the facilities and equipment. There are 8 partial gaps and 9 non-significant gaps. But what's interesting is that when we do a specific analysis, we see that there is nothing missing from the requirements of the international standard versus the new Mexican version of the standard, which is about to be enacted. Thank you. Next one, please. So we can conclude that even though there are gaps, those gaps are nothing that is missing. They're not missing requirements. They're covered in some way or another. Those partial gaps or the significant gaps are very closely related to the fact that in our regulatory framework in Mexico, there are some other documents in which there are specific requirements, and therefore we just give continuity in the official standard of good manufacturing practices. I hope I made myself clear. So the general conclusion of the first part of the presentation and then the second part of the presentation is the way in which the regulatory framework, COFEPRIS, has worked so as to achieve standardization, to incorporate international standards in the specific standards like the Mexican norm, the Mexican standard for good manufacturing processes of medical devices. So we can conclude that there's agreement, there's alignment between ISO 13485-2016 and the Mexican norm standard 241-2021. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'm ready for your questions later. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Bolaños, for your presentation. It is interesting to hear your assessment and approach for consideration of ISO 13485. If anybody has any questions for Ms. Bolaños or any of our speakers, please enter them in the chat now. And I would also like to invite all of our speakers to turn their video back on, and then we'll jump into the questions in the Q&A chat. I'd also like to invite my colleague from the FDA Latin American office to help moderate questions that are in Spanish.
So Stacy, you're gonna go ahead with the first one that is in English, and then I pick up the rest that is in Spanish?
Sure. This is for all of the panelists. So I'm going to go ahead and start with, let's see if we could start here. Beyond complying with the existing legal obligation to base regulations on international standards and conformity assessment, have you estimated the savings for regulators, manufacturers, and patients produced by the reutilization when compared to the development of local or unique country requirements? Selene, do you want to start us off with that question?
Bueno, pues digamos que nosotros estamos
All right. We are currently undergoing a stage in which we're analyzing all of the information. We are compiling the number of producers we have in Colombia and this type of parameters, because with this, we will be able to have a more grounded standard considering the requirements of each one of the producers and the regulatory procedures. So we're estimating that right now, so I have no figure to give you. We're still calculating it, and since there are so many parameters to consider, we're still working on it.
Great, thank you. Let's see, Rafael, would you like to go next?
Sí, en el caso de la
Yes, in the case of the Mexican pharmacopoeia, we don't have such a quantitative detail analysis on the benefits. We have qualitative analysis only. And it is based on the communication we keep with the users, because as you have seen, one of the paramount elements for us is the feedback that we get from the producers. So it is according to the needs that both the producers have, as well as the authorities with whom we reach a consensus of the things that are addressed in the yearly work plans. So it is like that now. But if we look at the process of the Mexican official standards, because the Mexican official standards There is a mechanism so as to do this cost-benefit analysis. It is a complicated one because it is also qualitative, since we start from different assumptions. There are some basic ideas, hard data, but then you need to work with different assumptions to model the benefits. And of course, in this case, the Mexican official standard, especially 241, this cost-benefit analysis is done and it is made public. It's released by the National Regulatory Commission, so that when this is published first as a project and then it is confirmed as a standard, it has to be, the benefit has to be higher than the cost, obviously.
Ms. Bolaños, is there anything that you would like to add to that?
Sí, únicamente añadir que
Just to add that in the case of the official Mexican standard, this is something that is compulsory for all of the producers who are producing in Mexico City. So according to this premise, it is important to consider that in point 6, related to the quality management system, that's where you find a scheme to do the check, to do the inspection, to do the calculation. It is streamlined, obviously, because there's a standardization between ISO 13485 and 0.6 of our standard. If the producer here in Mexico has an international ISO 13485 certification.
Thank you. And Ms. Solis, is there anything that you would like to follow up with? All right, then I guess we can move to our next question.
No. Tranquila.
Ok, muchas gracias, Stacy. La siguiente pregunta que tenemos es para Janet
The
Bolaños.
next question that we have is for Janet Bolaños, and they're asking if a producer wishes to have an MB from a certification from abroad, are they also required to comply with 241, or do you acknowledge ISO 13485 certificates for imported products, or are they obliged to also be in compliance with Mexican standards? Well, as I mentioned, in the case of standard 241, it's compulsory for producers in our country who have facilities here in Mexico. So complying with standard 241 for them, it is compulsory. However, in the case of medical devices that are produced in other countries, abroad, and that they're imported into Mexico, then in that case, the requirements are established only for the product to be registered. The only thing that we assess is that they're in compliance with ISO 13485, so yeah, it's validated. I think that with that, you've answered some of the questions already, because they were asking the same thing in different ways. The only thing that is different here is, where can we consult the information that Janet Bolaños has presented? Is there a link, a website? Sandra, could you also share with them the times are required for them to find this information on the coalition's website? Yes, of course. The presentations will be available on our website as of Monday next week, and during the next few days, we will also have the recordings of the sessions. Thank you very much. The last question is similar. It's about reliance. But perhaps, Janet, you would like to explain more about this. It says, considering that, generally speaking, ISO 13485 standards and non-241 are generally standardized in terms of reliance, what are the steps that are taken for these ISO 1345 certificates be acknowledged for sanitary registrations, as well as for the surveillance of manufacturing facilities in Mexico, so as to avoid duplication of rules? What you said is important. That is the first stage of an answer.
Norma 241 solo aplica a fabricantes ubicados en territorio nacional. Ya
It
abordé.
only applies to domestic manufacturers. We talked about this inspection being done more simplified because we only assess certain missing aspects of the good manufacturing practices area. So maybe we can talk about the works that are being done to acknowledge between the accreditation certificates of the ISO 13485. For that, we would talk about the registry process. And I want to say that this was published on December the 20th of 2021 and is transitory for 30 months. So right now, COFEPRIS as the regulatory agency is in a process, in a transition process, where we are assessing all of these treaties and acknowledgements and everything that has to do with the application of this law. Perfect, thank you. And those are all the questions. Stacy, go ahead, you have back the floor.
Thank you. I'd like to extend a huge thank you to all of our panelists today for providing their time and their insights. This has been a great discussion and we really appreciate your contributions. As Stephen mentioned in the previous panel, these discussions, don't end here. The development and utilization of international standards and conformity assessment is an ongoing process, and we will continue to visit these topics. Sandra, back to you. Thank you.
Stacey, thank you very much. And thank you very much for all the panelists. I think we have received a wealth of information again during this session and the interaction through the Q&A. I think it is really very beneficial for all of us. Time is never sufficient enough for us to get as much as we may from all the expertise from our panelists, but still we're very appreciative of your time and your commitment and your support to the activities that we are organizing along with the FDA under the Medical Device Regulatory Convergence Project. So really, thank you very much. And now I would like to invite Daniel Vasquez from the USAID office. He is a senior standards specialist to share with us some of his closing remarks. Thank you. Daniel, the floor is yours.
¿Me escuchan?
Ahora sí.
Ahora sí. Ahora sí.
Ok, gracias. Bueno, antes que nada quiero reconocer y agradecer el apoyo que hemos recibido en este evento por parte de la FDA y en general que el proyecto MDRC ha recibido de parte de esta agencia hermana de los Estados Unidos. He visto que Catherine estuvo con nosotros por la mañana haciendo unos remarks. Entonces, agradezco también su participación, pero de igual forma quiero reconocer el apoyo de mis colegas de NIST que contribuyeron a la conversación. Gordon estuvo presente también haciendo comentarios y también a los participantes del sector privado que hicieron intervenciones y presentaron sus experiencias en evaluación de conformidad y convergencia regulatoria. Espero que en el futuro haya mucho más oportunidades en que estas agencias, al igual que el sector privado, nos acompañen para conversar sobre estos temas y que los reguladores también puedan unirse a la conversación y también empaparse del conocimiento que se puede compartir entre todos los participantes cuando todos ellos están alrededor de las mesas. Agradezco mucho a los funcionarios del gobierno de Colombia y de México que pusieron hoy. Siempre valoramos mucho sus puntos de vista y bueno, como ustedes saben, pocas veces los temas de normalización, de evaluación de la conformidad y todos los demás relacionados con los servicios de control de la calidad no se encuentran en un papel protagónico en la conversación general de todos. Sin embargo, estos son temas fundamentales tanto para nuestras sociedades
very
para
important
nuestros
topics
sectores
for
y en el caso de los
society, for
dispositivos
our own
médicos
sectors,
están
and in the
en el
case of
corazón
medical
de
devices,
los
these
dispositivos
are
médicos
at the
también.
heart
Entonces no
of the
debemos
medical devices
desaprovechar la
area.
oportunidad
So we
para
should
darles la
take
relevancia que
advantage of this
merecen cuando es
opportunity to
posible
give it the
y
importance they require whenever
especialmente
possible, and
participar
will
y colaborar en
especially
las
to
acciones que puedan
participate
llevar a
and
cabo
collaborate in
su
any of the
mejora y
actions
responder
that
mejor
could
con ello
help us
a las
with its
crisis
improvement
sanitarias o
and
al
to better
mejoramiento
respond to
de
the
las
health crisis
poblaciones
or
al acceso de
to
productos de calidad.
improve the
Me
access
parece
of the
que
population
con
to
el
quality products
caso
and
de la
services.
pandemia,
I believe that because of the
la
pandemic,
necesidad
the
de
need
mejorar estos puntos ha
to
quedado más
improve
evidente,
this
entonces
points
hay que
was
tomar
really
ventaja
evident.
de esto
So we
y
need to take
impulsar
advantage of
con
that,
muchas ganas y con la
and
mayor fuerza que se
we really
pueda
need to
su
work
mejoramiento
as hard
y
as
su
possible
alineamiento con mejores
to
prácticas
improve them
internacionales.
and to align them
Quiero
to
invitar
best
a todos los
international
países que
practices.
se
I
benefician
would like
ahora
to
y a todas las
invite
agencias
all
que se
the
vienen ahora
countries
del
that
proyecto
are benefited
MDRC
and that are now
que
working
tomen
with
la
the
conversación de
MDRC
hoy como un
project
punto de
to
partida
take today's
para continuar
conversation as the
explorando estos
starting
temas
point to
y que
continue
aprovechen el
exploring these
potencial
topics
pleno del
and to
proyecto
take full
para que con
advantage
la
of the
cooperación
project
técnica
so
que se
that
les brinda
together with
entren
the technical
en una
collaboration that is
reflexión y
provided,
trabajo
you can start
profundo sobre
reflecting
estos
and
temas
doing
y
some
que trabajen en la
in-depth work on these
convergencia,
topics,
así
as well
obtengan
as you can
resultados
start working on the
duraderos
convergence to
en el
obtain
beneficio de todos.
last
Sandra, como
long-lasting
siempre,
results to
muchas
benefit
gracias.
everybody.
Muchas
Sandra,
gracias al equipo de
thank you very
MDRC
much. Thank you
y
to
pues
the
mucho éxito en
MDRC
los
team,
demás
and
eventos y actividades del
hopefully
proyecto
I wish you the best of
que
success in all
vienen
the
por
other
delante.
areas of the project and everything that you have for the future. Thank you very much, Danielle. Thank you for your words. And the only thing I can say is thank you for what you had just mentioned. With all the regulators, we know how much it means for you to participate in these events, but we also know that we really appreciate the value that you have here, and the value is giving with the capability, with the experience, and with the possible transfer of all of this knowledge that our guests have. You know, the success of these events is only possible because of the level of experience that all the presenters has, all of those who accept our invitation to participate here, and which we really thank them for. We once again invite the participants and the attendees not only to come back and review all of these materials that will be uploaded in the coalition's website, but to share that information with all of your colleagues at the regulatory level of the regulatory entities, as well as in private companies and all of those who are interested in the medical devices arena. This is a lot of experience and a lot of knowledge that is quite summarized, but that helps us to have an idea of what is happening so that we can work more in depth in these topics. So once again, thank you to all the participants, to all the speakers and the attendees. Invite all of you to consult all the recordings in the website of the coalition. And I also want to invite you to our next sessions that we were going to be organizing on topics we believe are of interest of all the regulators of the region, not only of the regulators that are participating right now in the Regulatory Convergence Project, but for all the regulators, so that we can continue share these knowledge and we can continue build these capabilities for the benefit of the patients in our region. So thank you very much. We want to thank the technical team. We want to thank the interpreters also who allowed us to bring this knowledge closer to all the participants. Remember that the materials will be available in English, Spanish, and Portuguese for your access, for your easy access. So thank you, Vesa. Stacy, do you have any additional comments, or should we wrap up the session?
No, that's it. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.